This is a mountain in modern-day Turkey. It sits above the ruins of the ancient city of Ephesus, on the far western edge of Asia Minor, looking out over the Aegean Sea. There is a small stone house here, and according to the oldest Christian traditions, this is where the mother of Jesus died, somewhere around the year 48 AD. She was a very long way from home. 800 miles away, across a sea, across mountains, across 2 countries, is the village where her life began, a small place called Nazareth. Most people think they know the story of Mary, the angel, the stable in Bethlehem, the cross, but almost no one knows the whole journey. Almost no one knows that the mother of Jesus traveled more than 1,000 miles in her lifetime, that she crossed into Egypt as a refugee, that she ended her life on a mountain in what is now Turkey, that her story is not one place, it is a map. So this is what we are going to do. We are going to trace every step she walked, every village, every road, every border she crossed, from the morning she was born in Nazareth to the evening she died on that mountain in Turkey. We are going to follow the mother of Jesus across the entire map of her life. It begins here, in a village so small and so poor that one of her son's own future followers would one day ask, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Nazareth, around 18 BC. When Mary was born, Nazareth was a village of maybe 200 or 300 people. It does not appear in the Old Testament. It does not appear in the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus. It was an agricultural nowhere, a cluster of stone houses on a ridge in the lower Galilean hills, surrounded by olive groves and barley fields. Her parents, according to the earliest traditions, were named Joachim and Anne. They were older. They had waited a long time for a child. And when their daughter was born, they gave her a name that in Hebrew was Miriam, the same name as the sister of Moses. We know her as Mary. Understand where she was growing up. This was occupied territory. The Romans had controlled this land since 63 BC. A few miles from Nazareth, the Romans were building a brand new city called Sepphoris, and they would crush a Jewish revolt there when Mary was a small child, burning the town and selling its people into slavery. Mary grew up in that shadow, a poor girl in a poor village in an occupied country. She learned to grind barley, to bake bread, to draw water, to weave wool. She learned the prayers and the scriptures of her people. She was, by every measure the world could see, completely ordinary. And here is something the map makes clear that we often forget. Nazareth sat only about 4 miles from Sepphoris, the Roman administrative capital of Galilee that was being rebuilt during Mary's childhood. So this girl grew up close enough to see Roman power with her own eyes. She would have known what it meant to live under an empire. She would have heard the stories of the revolt that was crushed nearby, the crosses lined along the roads, the families sold into slavery. She was not naive about the world. She knew exactly how brutal it could be. That is the girl the angel would come to, not a sheltered princess, a poor, devout, clear-eyed teenager in an occupied land, who already understood that saying yes to God could cost everything. And then, when she was perhaps 13 or 14 years old, something happened in this village that would split history in 2. But before that, there was a journey she made as a small child that almost no one talks about. A journey south, to the holiest city in the world. According to one of the oldest Christian traditions, recorded in a document from the 2nd century, when Mary was just 3 years old, her elderly parents took her on the long journey south to Jerusalem. They had made a vow. This long-awaited child would be dedicated to God. And so they brought her to the temple, the center of the Jewish world, the most sacred place on earth. And according to tradition, They left her there to be raised among the other consecrated girls who served in the temple precincts. Think about the contrast on this map. She came from Nazareth, a village too small to have a name worth recording. And now she was living in Jerusalem, a city of tens of thousands, beside a temple so vast and so gold that travelers said it looked like a mountain covered in snow and fire. For roughly 9 years, if the tradition is right, this is where Mary grew up, in the shadow of the temple. Learning the scriptures, weaving, praying, serving. A girl from nowhere, raised in the holiest place her people had. Picture the geography she was absorbing in these years. From a temple window, she could look east across the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives, the very hill where, decades later, she would watch her risen son ascend. She could look down on the courts where, as a 40-day-old infant, she had once been carried in her mother's arms. She did not know any of that yet. She was just a girl, learning to weave and pray in the holiest place in the world, with the whole map of her future still hidden from her. And then, when she reached the age of 12 or 13, the age when a Jewish girl became a woman, she could no longer remain in the temple. She had to be entrusted to a guardian, a husband. And so she was betrothed to a much older man from her own ancestral line, a quiet builder named Joseph, and sent back north, back to the village where she had been born, back to Nazareth, where the angel was waiting. She was betrothed, but not yet living with Joseph. In Jewish custom, betrothal was a binding legal bond, but the bride still lived in her own family's home for a period before the marriage was completed. So Mary was back in Nazareth, probably 13 or 14 years old, living an ordinary life again. And then, the Gospel of Luke tells us, an angel came, the angel Gabriel, and the message was impossible. You will conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He will be great, and will be called the Son of the Most High. Mary asked the only logical question: how can this be since I am a virgin? And the answer was, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. She was a teenage girl in an occupied village. She knew exactly what an unexplained pregnancy could mean for an unmarried girl. Shame, abandonment, possibly even death by stoning under the strictest reading of the law. And she said yes anyway. Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. It is, when you stop and think about it, the single most consequential yes ever spoken. And it was spoken by a teenage girl, alone, in a poor stone house, in a village that did not even appear on the maps of the empire that ruled her. And the first thing she did, the very first thing, was leave. She packed a small bag and set out alone on a journey of about 90 miles south to find the one person on earth who might believe her. The Gospel of Luke says Mary went with haste into the hill country of Judea, to a town where her older relative Elizabeth lived. Think about this journey on the map. A pregnant teenage girl traveling roughly 90 miles, largely alone, through occupied and sometimes dangerous territory, from Galilee down into Judea. It would have taken her 3 to 5 days on foot. Why? Because the angel had told her something else. Her relative Elizabeth, old, long past childbearing age, believed to be barren her whole life, was also miraculously pregnant, 6 months along. And when Mary walked through Elizabeth's door, the Gospel says the old woman felt her own unborn child leap inside her. And she cried out, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." Elizabeth believed her. The first human being to recognize who Mary was carrying was not a king or a priest. It was an old pregnant woman in a hill village. And here, in this house, Mary spoke the words that have been prayed and sung for 2,000 years. The song we call the Magnificat. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. She stayed about 3 months, long enough, almost certainly, to be there when Elizabeth gave birth to her son, a boy who would grow up to be John the Baptist. And then Mary went home, pregnant, unmarried, and about to face the one person whose reaction could destroy her, her betrothed husband, Joseph. What happened next is one of the quiet turning points of the whole story. Joseph found out his betrothed was pregnant, and the child was not his. Under the law, Joseph had every right to expose her publicly. A betrothed woman found pregnant by another could be accused of adultery. The consequences ranged from public disgrace to death. The Gospel of Matthew tells us Joseph was a just man, and he decided to divorce her quietly, to spare her the worst. That was already an act of mercy. But then Joseph had a dream. An angel told him, "Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit." And Joseph, a quiet man who says not one single word in any of the 4 Gospels, simply obeyed. He took her into his home. He claimed the child as his own. He gave Mary and her son the one thing they needed most in that world: the protection of a husband and a father. On the map, nothing has moved. They are still in Nazareth. But everything has changed. Mary is no longer a disgraced girl facing the world alone. She is a wife. She has a protector. And then, in the final months of her pregnancy, an order came from the most powerful man in the world. The Roman Emperor, Caesar Augustus, decreed a census of the entire empire. Everyone had to return to their ancestral hometown to be registered. Joseph was descended from King David, and David's town was Bethlehem. So a 9 months pregnant teenager and her husband set out on the hardest journey of her life so far. 90 miles south, on foot, in the cold, to Bethlehem. The Christmas cards make this journey look peaceful. A calm donkey, a starry sky, a short, pleasant trip. The reality was brutal. They likely took the longer, safer route, east to the Jordan Valley to avoid hostile Samaria, then south along the river, then a hard climb west up into the Judean hills. Roughly 90 miles, 4 to 5 days of walking. And remember, she was 9 months pregnant, riding sideways on a hard wooden pack saddle for 8 hours a day. Through the wilderness of Judea, the most dangerous stretch of road in the country, where bandits operated openly. The same road her son would one day set a famous story on, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And here is a detail the map reveals that the Christmas story usually skips. Bethlehem was not a random place. It was Joseph's ancestral town, the town of King David, 1,000 years earlier. The prophet Micah had written centuries before that a ruler of Israel would come out of Bethlehem. So the census that dragged a pregnant teenager 90 miles south was, on the map, also fulfilling an ancient prophecy. The most powerful man in the world, Caesar Augustus, signed a tax order in Rome. And without knowing it, he moved a poor Galilean family to exactly the town where the scriptures said the Messiah would be born. They finally reached Bethlehem at the end of the journey, and the town was packed. The census had brought everyone of David's line back at once. Every guest room was full. And so, the most famous birth in human history happened in the humblest possible place. Tradition says it was a cave used to shelter animals, behind a relative's full house. There was a stone feeding trough, a manger, and that became the cradle. A teenage girl, 80-odd miles from her home, gave birth to her first child in a cave, alone except for an old carpenter, and laid the Son of God in a feeding trough. And almost immediately, the danger began. 40 days after the birth, Jewish law required a mother to present her firstborn son at the temple and offer a sacrifice. So Mary and Joseph made the short trip, just 6 miles, up to Jerusalem. Their offering tells you everything about their means. The law allowed a poor family who could not afford a lamb to bring 2 doves or pigeons instead. That is what they brought. 2 birds, the offering of the poor. And there, an old man named Simeon took the baby in his arms and blessed him, and then turned to Mary and said something that would hang over the rest of her life. This child is destined for the falling and rising of many in Israel, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also. A sword will pierce your own soul. She would not understand the full weight of those words for another 33 years. But she kept them, the Gospel says, in her heart. Because there was a king in this land, Herod the Great, paranoid, brutal, and dying. And word had reached him from travelers, wise men from the east following a star, that a new king of the Jews had been born in Bethlehem. Herod's response was to order the slaughter of every male child under 2 years old in and around Bethlehem. But Joseph was warned in another dream. Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt. And so the family ran, in the night, out of their own country, across a desert, into a foreign land where they did not speak the language. The mother of Jesus became a refugee. This is the part of the map almost no one pictures. Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus crossed roughly 250 miles of desert to reach Egypt. Egypt was outside Herod's reach. It was a Roman province, but it had huge, long-established Jewish communities, especially around the city of Alexandria and throughout the Nile Delta. A Jewish refugee family could disappear into those communities and survive. Think about what this meant for her. She was a teenage mother in a foreign country. She did not speak Egyptian. She had no family there, no home, no standing. She and Joseph survived on his trade. A builder takes his hands wherever he goes, and on the kindness of strangers in the Jewish quarter. There is something worth sitting with here. The land they fled to, Egypt, was the same land their ancestors had fled from, more than 1,000 years earlier in the Great Exodus under Moses. The map of Jewish history runs in both directions through this desert. Once, God led the people out of Egypt to freedom. Now, to protect the child who would free them in a deeper way, God sent the Holy Family into Egypt for safety. The early Christians saw this and never forgot it. The new Moses, hidden in the old land of slavery, until it was safe to come home. The Gospels do not tell us how long they stayed. Tradition suggests anywhere from a few months to a few years. Long enough for the danger to pass. Long enough for the toddler to take his first steps on foreign soil. And then the news came that changed everything. The old king was dead. Herod was gone. Once more, Joseph dreamed. Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead. It was time to go home, but not all the way home, because Herod's son now ruled Judea, and he was as dangerous as his father. So the family avoided Bethlehem and Jerusalem entirely and went all the way back north. They went back to where it all began. Nazareth, the little village in the Galilean hills. And here, on the map, everything goes quiet for almost 30 years. Look at how far this woman had already traveled. Born in Nazareth, raised in Jerusalem, back to Nazareth, south to the Judean hills, back, south again to Bethlehem, into Egypt, back to Nazareth, close to 1,000 miles, and she was still only a young woman. Now comes the longest, quietest, and least recorded chapter of her life. The Gospels tell us almost nothing about the next 30 years. We know that Jesus grew up here. We know Joseph taught him the building trade. We know the family kept the Jewish feasts. This is the ordinary part, the part with no angels and no kings. Just a mother raising a son, grinding the flour, baking the bread, washing the tunics, teaching the scriptures, watching a boy grow into a man year after year, in a house too small and a village too poor to matter to anyone. And think about what was being formed in this ordinary house. Everything her son would later become. Every parable about a farmer scattering seed, a woman baking bread, a shepherd searching for one lost sheep, a father running to welcome home a son, came out of this life. Out of the world his mother built around him, day after unremarkable day, for 30 years. The map goes still here precisely because this is where the real work happened. Not in the famous moments, in the 10,000 forgotten mornings. And somewhere in these silent years, Joseph died. The Gospels never describe it, but he simply disappears from the story. By the time Jesus begins his public life, Mary is a widow, and her firstborn son is the man of the house. There is one moment the Gospels do record from these hidden years. When Jesus was 12, the family made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and on the way home, they realized he was missing. They found him 3 days later in the temple, sitting among the teachers, astounding them with his understanding. And when his frantic mother asked why he had done this to them, he gave the first recorded words of his life. "Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" She did not fully understand. But once again, the Gospel says, she kept it in her heart. And they went home to Nazareth, and the quiet years continued, until the day her son walked out the door and changed the world. When Jesus was about 30, he left Nazareth and was baptized in the Jordan River and began gathering followers. And one of the very first places his public life intersects with his mother is a wedding in the village of Cana, just a few miles from Nazareth. The Gospel of John tells the story. Midway through the celebration, the wine ran out, a social catastrophe for the host family, a humiliation that would be remembered for years. And it was Mary who noticed, Mary who acted. She turned to her son and said simply, "They have no wine." Jesus seemed reluctant. "My hour has not yet come." But Mary had already decided. She turned to the servants and said the last words the Gospels ever record from her mouth. "Do whatever he tells you." And he did it. 6 stone jars of water became the finest wine of the feast, the first of his miracles. And it happened because his mother pushed him into it. Notice what this tells us about her. Even now, with her son grown and beginning something enormous and frightening, she is still doing what she has always done. Paying attention, stepping in, quietly making things happen. Still a mother. From here, Jesus' ministry exploded outward across Galilee, teaching, healing, gathering crowds. And Mary was there, in the background, watching her son become something the whole country was talking about. Watching the crowds grow, and watching the danger grow with them. And here, the map and the story do something quietly heartbreaking. For the next 3 years, Mary mostly fades into the background. Her son belongs to the crowds now. He travels constantly, village to village around the Sea of Galilee, up to Jerusalem and back, across the lake, through Samaria. The mother who had been the center of his entire world for 30 years now watches him from the edges, one face in a crowd of thousands, as he becomes something that no longer belongs to her alone. Because the road her son was walking had only one destination, and the map was about to lead them both to the place every pilgrim feared and revered: Jerusalem. For the last time, Mary made the journey to Jerusalem one last time, for the Passover. The same road, the same city she had been brought to as a 3-year-old child, the same temple where old Simeon had warned her about a sword. Within days, her son was betrayed, arrested, condemned, and sentenced to die by crucifixion, the most agonizing and humiliating execution the Roman Empire had. And Mary did what almost no one else dared to do. While most of his followers fled and hid, his mother walked to the foot of the cross, and she stayed. For hours, she stood there and watched her son die, the baby she had carried into Egypt, the boy she had taught to pray, the man she had pushed into his first miracle at a wedding. She watched him die. Stop and trace what this map has shown us to reach this hill. The same woman standing at the foot of this cross was once a 3-year-old child climbing the temple steps just a mile from here. She was the teenager who said yes to an angel in Nazareth. She was the refugee who carried this man as a baby across the desert into Egypt to save his life. She had spent more than 30 years protecting him, and now she stood helpless, and watched the empire kill him a short walk from where she had first presented him to God. Every mile of this map led to this hill, and she did not look away. This was the sword Simeon had promised her 33 years earlier in the temple. A sword will pierce your own soul. Now she understood. And from the cross, in nearly his last breath, her son did one final thing for her. He looked at his mother and at the disciple he loved, John, and he said, "Woman, behold your son." And to John, "Behold your mother." He was giving her a new son, a protector for the years she had left. Because in that world, a widow with no living children had nothing, and her firstborn, even while dying, was making sure she would be cared for. And then he died, and they took his body down and laid it in a tomb. And the mother of Jesus walked away from that hill, having lost the child she had said yes to, in a poor stone house when she was barely more than a child herself. But the story and the map was not finished. 3 days after the crucifixion, the tomb was found empty. The Gospels focus on others in the resurrection accounts: Mary Magdalene, Peter, John, the disciples on the road. They do not describe Mary, the mother's reaction, directly. But the earliest Christian traditions are united on one thing: she believed. Of course she believed. She had believed since she was 14 years old. And then, weeks later, something else happened in Jerusalem that puts Mary right at the center of the map again. The book of Acts tells us that after Jesus ascended, his followers, about 120 of them, gathered in an upper room in Jerusalem to pray and wait. And Acts names exactly who was there: the apostles with the women, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. She was there. At the very birth of the church, the mother of Jesus was in the room. And then came Pentecost, the rushing wind, the tongues of fire, the Holy Spirit falling on all of them. The same Spirit that had overshadowed her in a stone house in Nazareth 50 years earlier now fell on the whole gathered church, with her sitting in the middle of it. Trace that on the map and on the timeline. The power that came to one frightened teenage girl, alone, in the poorest village in Galilee, now came to 120 people in the capital city, and from there it would spread to the entire Roman world. And the one human being who had been present at both moments, the first and the last, was Mary. She was there at the conception of Christ. She was there at the birth of his church. But Jerusalem was becoming dangerous for the followers of Jesus. Persecution began. Believers were arrested, scattered, killed. And the mother of Jesus, the most recognizable woman in the entire movement, was no longer safe in the Holy Land. And so John, the disciple her son had given her from the cross, kept his promise. He took her away, far away, to safety, across the sea. According to the oldest traditions of the Church, Catholic and Orthodox alike, the disciple John eventually settled in the great city of Ephesus, on the western coast of what is now Turkey. And he brought Mary with him. Picture this on the map. A woman born in a village so small it had no name worth recording, who had already crossed deserts and borders, now boarding a ship and crossing the open sea to a foreign continent. To Asia Minor, to one of the largest, richest, most pagan cities in the entire Roman Empire. Ephesus was enormous, 250,000 people, the home of the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the world, a center of pagan worship, magic, and trade. And into this city came an aging Jewish widow from Galilee, the mother of a crucified Galilean teacher, to live out her final years. John did not settle her in the noisy heart of the city. Tradition says he built her a small stone house up on the slope of a quiet mountain above Ephesus, the place known today as Mount Nightingale, or in Turkish, Bulbul Dağ. And here, at last, the traveling stopped. The girl from Nazareth, who had been carried and pushed across more than 1,000 miles of the ancient world, finally came to rest. On a mountain, above the sea, 800 miles from the village where she was born. This is where she would spend her last years. And this is where, according to the tradition the whole ancient church remembered, she would die. She was somewhere between 65 and 75 years old. Her hair was fully silver. Her hands were knotted from a lifetime of work, grinding, kneading, weaving, carrying. She had outlived her husband. She had outlived her son and then seen him again. She had watched the church she helped birth spread across the empire. Her days here were quiet and ordinary, the way most of her life had been, between the great moments. She woke before dawn, as she always had. She drew water from a spring down the hillside path, the same path every morning. She prayed. She received the pilgrims and believers who climbed the mountain to meet the mother of Jesus. And then, one morning, according to the tradition the early church preserved, she knew it was time. The tradition calls it the dormition, the falling asleep. It says her son came back for her, that the room filled with light, that after a lifetime of saying yes to the angel, to Joseph, to Bethlehem, to Egypt, to the cross, to the long road to Ephesus, she said yes one final time, and she went home. John found her, the disciple who had kept his promise for 15 years. The believers of the mountain came and prepared her body the way Jewish tradition required, with linen, with spices, the same myrrh and frankincense that wise men had once brought to her infant son. They laid her in a small tomb cut into the rock of the mountain. And there, the map of her earthly life comes to its end. Look at the whole map now. Every line, every journey. Over 1,400 miles, across 3 countries, over a span of 70 years. Step back and look at what this map actually shows. It shows a girl from a village too small to matter, who was carried and driven across the ancient world by forces far bigger than herself. A census, a jealous king, a ministry, a crucifixion, a persecution. She did not choose most of these journeys. The world moved her. The empire moved her. History moved her. And yet, At every single stop on this map, she did the same thing. She said yes. She kept going. She held the family together. She paid attention. She stepped in. She endured. From the first yes in Nazareth to the last breath on Mount Nightingale, she was, at every point on this map, a mother. That is what the map shows that the single famous moments hide. We remember Bethlehem. We remember the cross. But between and around those moments was a whole life of travel, exile, work, worry, and love. Most of it never recorded. All of it carried by one ordinary woman. And every mother who has ever moved her family for safety. Every woman who has ever followed love or duty into a foreign place. Every parent who has buried a child and somehow kept living. Every person who has traveled a long, hard road they did not choose and kept saying yes anyway, is walking a piece of the same map Mary walked. From a stone house in Nazareth to a stone house on a mountain in Turkey. Over 1,000 miles. 70 years. One yes after another after another. That was the life of Mary. If this gave you a new way to see her, to see the whole journey instead of just the famous moments, subscribe. Because we trace the rest of these stories one step at a time. Tell me in the comments, which part of the map surprised you most? That she was a refugee in Egypt? That she crossed the sea to Turkey? That she traveled over 1,400 miles in her lifetime? Or that her very last act, on a mountain above the Aegean, was the same as her first in Nazareth, to say yes? I read every comment. Thank you for walking the whole map with me. I'll see you on the next journey.